Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to Drak Reviews, where I take on a game that, for the life of me, I just can't understand the level of hatred that it has, as I take on the sequel to the PlayStation 4 launch title, Knack, with Knack 2. So let's go ahead and get things started into the story. Now, I should probably preface this again. This game, for some reason, has gotten hatred. I don't know why. Especially its first game got like 6s and 7s in a lot of cases, and most of the arguments that I saw in those reviews were, it's not a next-gen title. I just have to ask the question, what defines a next-gen title? Because a lot of the titles that people bring up to me don't look next-gen by their own definition, and some of them are shooters. That being said, I will say that Knack 2 fared a little bit better amongst the internet reviewing crowd, but let's see how well it fared. Starting things off with the story, so if you haven't played Knack, which I'm guessing that you haven't, let me go ahead and give a brief summation of at least the origin of Knack from the first game. The professor, an old explorer, actually discovered some old relics in this futuristic society and decided to experiment them and thus brought them to life, thus creating Knack. Knack is basically a being that can take relics, which is the power source of modern day society in the universe of Knack, and he can actually add them onto his own body or take on other kind of elements or powers because of that. And thus, that's kind of the allure of Knack, is like you can eventually just get super, super big in the gameplay, as well as super, super small and gain extra powers because of it. So that being said, they also have found themselves in some pretty dangerous situations with the origins of the planet itself, as well as the origins of relics themselves, and have just barely saved the world from the first game, and are now living a life of peace and luxury, especially as Knack and his buddy Lucas, who is the professor's assistant, are now living in the city together and occasionally go out with their buddy Ryder to explore old ruins of the ancient world. And that's kind of where the story kicks off, is that while they're exploring these ancient ruins, Lucas comes across an ancient battlefield from the fabled Crystal Wars, and Ryder knows what it is, but he notices that a lot of the robots are starting to come to life as they start to do, and we have a new problem where these ancient robots, which were said to be able to take out all of humanity, that were designed by the high goblins of the ancient era, are starting to come back to life, and therefore we have a new threat to humanity that Knack needs to take on. That's kind of the basic premise of the story, and I will admit that I did take some points off in the story department for Knack 2. I don't think the story's bad by any stretch, but it did run really long. There were actually a few points in this game where I honestly think you could have cut it off, and that could have been kind of the opening premise, or probably even the majority of the plot, for Knack 3. And I'm not sure if that's just because they didn't get approved for Knack 3 or what actually is going on there, but the story does run pretty long, especially compared to the previous game. So I did take a few points off for that. Moving on into the visuals. The visuals are very similar to the way they look in the original Knack, especially Knack. He looks very much the same that he did in the original game. Maybe some added detail here and there. And the environments that he goes into look gorgeous. I mean, this definitely looks like it's been stepped up a notch by the Sony Interactive Studios in-house. I do believe that they've actually done a lot of solid work. I did take a few points off, though, because while they were trying to add on and age some of these models, some of it just looks kind of wonky. An example that I have is, like, if a character has a full-on beard, that's not necessarily the problem. If they have, like, 5 o'clock shadow, which is supposed to look like stray facial hair, it looks really weird on the model because it's, in some cases, brighter than the skin tone of the model. And so in some cases it looks weird, but not necessarily bad. I didn't see any models that made me go, what the heck were they thinking? It's just occasional nitpicks here and there with each character model where I started to notice tiny little issues. So I did take a few points off in that regard. Moving on into the gameplay. If you've played any kind of old school platformer or the previous Knack game, you know what you're walking into. Knack is a platformer, but also with the added addition, or with the addition of relics being a forefront kind of thing that you want to get. That's the power-ups for Knack, is that he can either grow, he can get additional abilities, like say he can bring in ice crystals into his body and be able to do extra damage or be able to start freezing things in place. But if he loses that, then he's back down to normal Knack. He can't necessarily do that. And that's pretty much how that goes. It's a platformer, but with the added concept of actually integrating Knack's size into the gameplay. This is actually something I wanted from the original one, where a lot of those levels basically played out as you start as small Knack and then you eventually build up. This one decided we need a button for you to be able to go down to the absolute basic Knack whenever. And therefore, we can add so many more platforming elements because you actually have to shrink down and do the platforming, get to the next area, and then regrow into Knack. Or in a lot of cases, we can hide a lot of really cool power-ups as you go along if you pay attention to them. Now, compared to the original Knack, this is a step up. This is definitely learning from what I would consider to be the mistakes of the previous Knack and stepping it up to the next level to be able to do so much more with the character, with the story, as well as with the elements of gameplay, because now you actually could do additional elements for, say, Stealth Knack or for Metal Knack. They actually added so much more depth to that by doing just so very little. So I actually, and not only that, but polishing the original gameplay. It really plays well. So I got to admit, I didn't take too many points off here. Moving on into the audio, the voice cast is top notch. Once again, we have really great performances from Travis Willingham, from Laura Bailey, as well as from, the name I was trying to remember was Jennifer Hale, who actually plays a couple of characters in the series. I don't know why I forgot her right off the top of my head. As well as I'm going to give some extra props to Ike Amadi, who plays Knack himself, as well as to the returning villain Matthew Mercer, and also Brian T. Delaney, who's a brand new cast member who plays Xander, the noble monk, and all of which did a really great job with their voice roles, and also were able to add more character than I think even the visuals could provide. The other step up that I will say is that where the original Knack, I'm not saying the music was bad, but it definitely wasn't memorable. This definitely was. There were a lot of tracks that I was humming after I was doing recording sessions, and that's a good thing. I'm not necessarily saying that they were stuck in my head and I didn't want them there. They were very pleasant tunes, or they actually got very action-packed. I did like a lot of what happened here with the audio design, and once again, a step up from the previous Knack, so very well done there. And I didn't really take too many points off in this department. Replay value and presentation. Replay value is here. I mean, if you make your way all the way through the original story, you can go back in a new game plus mode because there are talents in the game. This is another added element with the gameplay, is you can get talents that will enhance Knack's punching power, Knack's kicking power, things like that. So you can complete the tree if you want to, or you can go through the story again if you really do like it. And you can all do it in New Game Plus fashion. Or if you want to find all of the hidden items, that's also a definite perk that you can do. And I can actually say that for fans and newcomers alike, if there are Knack fans, because again, I don't know why the internet hates this game, there's definitely replay value for you here. Presentation, does it all come together? Absolutely it does. I would actually dare say that this is the epitome of what I've tried to point out in my review since I started, of a first entry game learning from its predecessor and therefore polishing the product, as it were. A first product is always going to be rough. It's always going to be kind of jagged, and it's just because they're trying to figure out how their formula is working, how they want it to work, and that's where a second entry can be really helpful, because then you can polish off those jagged edges. You can fine-tune the roughness that there is in the gameplay, and you can make it even better. which is why I have no problem giving Knack 2 a 9 out of 10. It is an A effort. Is it a masterpiece by any stretch? No. It looks like Bark Cerny and the Sony crew need to learn just a little bit more, but it's definitely an improvement from the first game, and I will at least acknowledge that. Whereas I would give the original Knack either a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10. This is definitely a 9 out of 10, but is it worth it? Currently, Knack is only available on PlayStation 4, and it can be bought either digitally or for physical copies, and the digital price is $39.99 US. Although I am starting to see physical copies, both new and old, starting to go down into the $29.99 range. Is it worth it at that price? I would actually say the $29.99 price is a little bit better. I'm not saying that the effort here isn't worth $40, but if you can get it at a discount, it'd be even better, especially considering that this franchise is still young, budding, and trying to get fans into it. So at that point, as cheap as you can possibly get it would be better. But I think after you get in there, the full price is definitely worth it for the next entry. And that's going to go ahead and do it for this review of Knack 2. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you guys so much for your continued love, support, and patience as I continue to get these reviews out. And of course, I'll be back in time for the next review.